Okay, welcome back to the Grand Strategy Summit, and we are about to get started on our next session, which will cover what it means for America to lead on the world stage today. Our participants today are Bonnie Glick, who's an American diplomat and businesswoman who served as the Deputy Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development from 2019 to 2020, nominated by President Trump and confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate. She currently serves as a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Glick's prior experience includes 12 years as a Foreign Service officer with tours in Ethiopia, Nicaragua, and positions at the State Department, the National Security Council, and the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Juan Guaidó served as interim president of Venezuela from 2019 through 2023. Widely recognized as a global champion of democracy, he led efforts to restore constitutional order and freedom during one of Venezuela's most turbulent periods. His leadership inspired international support for the Venezuelan people's fight for liberty and democracy. And our moderator today is Matthew Foldi. If you were here last night, you'll remember Matthew. He's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Washington Reporter. Please welcome our panelist.
Well, good morning, everyone. You're not rid of me just yet. And we tried to get Pitbull for this panel, but instead of Mr. Worldwide, we have Mr. and Mrs. Worldwide. We've got Mr. 58 and Mrs. 301 here. And I think let's kick things off with President Guaidó to have you talk about the elephant in the room, which is, in my estimation, President Trump not winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, it went to a very deserving Venezuelan leader, Maria Corina Machado, who also lost a contested Latin American presidential election. Tell me your thoughts on her leadership and how sort of you view that decision by the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, good morning and thank you for the invitation. As you know, speaking about Pitbull, I was forced to exile by the Maduro regime. And in this moment in Miami, in the capital of the Spanglish, as you know, I have to warn you, my English is not very good looking, like used to say Celia Cruz. But speaking about not only the President Trump, I want to talk about the commitment of the President Trump has been determined in confronting Maduro, by the way. What happened in Venezuela is not only a dictatorship. They become a criminal autocracy. What began as an authoritarian regime has evolved into a system that fuses state power with organized crime, using the nation's wealth to serve not our people, but to evade justice and sustain power through fear, corruption, and violence. Several years of struggling back in Venezuela, not only the recognition of the President Trump in 2019 at our interim government in that moment, the winning of the National Assembly back in 2015, and Maria Corina Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize. And immediately they recognized the leadership of President Trump, who in these moments leading an operation back in the Caribbean to confront, to face that criminal regime back in Venezuela that use narco-trafficking, terrorism, and directly to threaten the Western Hemisphere in this moment. They use chaos as a weapon, the human suffering as weapon, the migration, El Tren de Aragua, who is leading criminal organizations in all Latin America. So in this moment, that operation in the Caribbean is not against Venezuelan, by the way. It's against a criminal regime leading by Maduro and his cronies. So I'm sure that the commitment, the leadership of President Trump, not only the Caribbean, around the world, is not only for a Nobel Peace Prize, it's to stabilize the region, is to not only try to achieve a free continent that suppose, as by the way, Senator Marco Rubio in his confirmation hearing say America must remain prosperous, stronger, and safer. And this leading way need the Americas prosperous, stronger, and safer. So the freedom, the security, and our future are inseparable in this moment, and President Trump knows well.
And President Guaidó, tu inglés es mejor de mi español, so you don't have to worry about that. Bonnie, let's also get your thoughts on the Nobel Peace Prize decision. We'll talk more about what you did in the first Trump administration with the Abraham Accords, but it seems to me that there's hardly been someone more deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize, even just for what Trump did in the first 4 years. And we discussed last night that President Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize for being elected in 2008. And yet here we are. Trump, just like Nixon, has not yet received the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, first of all, thank you to the Nixon Foundation for convening all of us here today. It is great to see President Guaidó, who has been a heroic leader of the Venezuelan people, as have many others who have been fighting the dictatorial and illegitimate regime of Nicolás Maduro, as well as his predecessor. We will all remember Hugo Chavez, who basically turned Venezuela into a narco-terrorist supporting state with connections to some of the worst terrorists around the world. When it comes to the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado is certainly a very brave and patriotic Venezuelan citizen who has done an awful lot for the Venezuelan people. But even she, in accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, dedicated it to the people suffering in Venezuela and also to President Trump for his efforts to build peace and make peace and be the peacemaker around the world. So the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, sitting in Norway, almost can't get out of its own way. They can't deny the undeniable, which is that President Trump is a force for peacemaking in the world, and he was a logical choice for the Nobel Peace Prize. But Oslo, Norway, has really been captured, as has much of Western Europe, by this progressive cult and the chattering class of the World Economic Forum and other organizations similarly aligned. Obama, as you said, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize just 12 days after assuming office, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize, the committee said, because of what he would do in the future, because up until that point in time, what had he done? He was a community organizer. Were the communities at war which he organized? It
was the south side of Chicago.
It was the south side of Chicago. So when you think about the Nobel Prizes in general, they are heavily politicized. The Nobel Peace Prize itself is sort of an anachronism in history because it's awarded under the name of Alfred Nobel, who himself was an arms and ammunitions maker and dealer. And so perhaps this was his penance to set up the Nobel Peace Prize in his own name to make up for all of the weapons that he sold all over the world. But it sort of comes full circle when you look at how President Trump, who has, in the course of just his first 9 months in office in his second term, built peace in 8 different situations around the world. You kind of can't beat that. at the same time, it is symptomatic of the place we are in as conservatives in the world.
And I'm really excited to be moderating this panel very early in the morning, and thanks to everyone for being here. I mean, we have two people who I could hardly think of better people, other than Pitbull, to be on this panel. And for those of you who
I don't know who Pitbull is.
Okay, all right. That's a problem for next year. We'll get him next year. But maybe we'll get Bad Bunny and Pitbull on stage next year. But I think for those of you who don't know, President Guaidó was recognized by the first Trump administration as the legitimate president of Venezuela. And one of the things that Congressman Darrell Issa talked about last night, and I'll paraphrase slightly, was Trump reclaimed peace as a term from the left that was normally synonymous with surrender and weakness and America retreating, a la Afghanistan. And made it into something that, is a cliche, but is peace through strength. And one of the many ways in our own hemisphere that I love seeing is President Guaidó, what we're seeing, the strikes on what the Trump administration is claiming to be drug boats coming from Venezuela, Colombia. These strikes are happening, in some cases, thousands of miles off the coast of the United States, but I think sometimes it's better to solve a problem before it becomes a bigger problem. From your standpoint, do you think that these are legitimate targets? I mean, our Department of War is bombing these and releasing the kill cam footage. What is actually going on with these boats? The Trump administration is saying they're carrying drugs. You're both characterizing the Maduro regime as a narco-terrorist state. Is this a good move by the administration?
Well, Maduro is indicted by terrorism, drug dealer, trafficking, two generals, Venezuelan generals, awfully, very bad in this moment, are in jail in Venezuela. And they condemn, point Maduro as the lead of the drug cartel operation. As I said before, Maduro is not only a regular dictatorship regime that use the power of the state for being in power. It has become a criminal autocracy. They have links with Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, also China, to sustain power through fear, corruption, and violence. The operation, and let's be clear, the operation back in the Caribbean is a legit operation. The U.S. Navy's presence in the Caribbean are not against Venezuelan people. We Venezuelan people welcome every effort that upholds the rule of international law to confront that kind of regimes. We are in a decade struggle for the democracy being restored in Venezuela, back in the streets, in a non-violent struggle with the rule of law, winning an election last year, July 28, and in this moment, when Maduro faced true leadership, he's afraid of Trump. It's important this. He's in this moment facing the rule of law. I want to repeat, we welcome every effort that will hold the rule of international law and the leadership of President Trump. The real enemy is not Venezuelan nation. We Venezuelans not being threatened. It's the criminal system led by Maduro and his cronies. So it's not only indicted, it's not only his ties with ELN, FARC dissidents back in South America, the train, the Aragua that they use like some kind of third-party operations that threaten all the region. In this moment, our Venezuelan struggle is not isolated. It's a mirror of what happened when corruption, impunity, and foreign interference, talking about China, Iran, and Russia, converge. So, if the world tolerates criminal autocracies like Maduro's, they invite others. If we allow chaos to be weaponized, it will not stop at our borders. It is spread all the region. So it's a legit operation that target who lead a drug cartel and says kidnap a nation to promote chaos, into the region.
And I want to drill down on what you were just saying. There was an intelligence assessment that Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence here, put out linking Nicaragua like this, hand in glove with the Maduro regime. Can you talk about what those links are, and does Venezuela have to be this way? Again, you were the president of Venezuela. I assume that you were not working hand in glove with Nicaragua. What is that country? How can that relationship be severed when Maduro is no longer running that country?
Well, I want to use one example. Back in Chile, the general attorney back in Chile focus or point Diosdado Cabello and Nicolás Maduro. Also, by the way, Gabriel Boric, president of Chile, he point Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello as the material, the authors, intellectual authors of the assassination of El Teniente Ojeda, Lieutenant Ojeda, who was exiled in Chile for the persecution of the Maduro regime. The general attorney of Chile indict Diosdado Cabello, who's the second in charge of Maduro, and Gabriel Boric point the Maduro regime to lead that assassination executed by El Tren de Aragua. They use this kind of organization to terrorize, to transnational persecution, not only in Chile, Colombia. 1 week ago, they tried to kill two of members of our team who was exiled back in Colombia. That's the kind of regime that hold Maduro. With Maduro in power, leading all the assets, all the commodities back in Venezuela, that's a real threat for all the Western Hemisphere. If Maduro says power or stay in control, it's going to be Iran, Russia, China, in the middle of the continent. And again, the chaos is not only a consequence, it's his tool to threaten all the region.
And I warned everyone we're going to be zooming all over the world. I will note the Trump administration just put a bounty on Maduro's head of 10 or 100 million.
50 million, yeah.
50 million. All right, split the difference. So if we have any enterprising bounty hunters who are listening today, you might get him back as president a little bit faster if you carry out that bounty. And Bonnie, you were talking about how Trump, in essence, should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize the first time. The Nobel Committee said they kind of fell back on the excuse of, well, we had to make the decision so early in what was Trump's second term, and as you noted, Obama received it regardless of that fact. But looking back at what he accomplished with the Abraham Accords, and I assume we're probably going to get to how those have been a huge success in the wake of the Hamas savage terrorist attack on southern Israel on October 7th. But you yourself were an instrumental part in the Abraham Accords during the first Trump term. I guess we'll come next to what countries you think could be on the horizon. But can you talk about how that alliance diplomatic tool was a way for America to exercise its influence, and I think specifically with Morocco. But pick your country that joined it.
Sure, and it's a great question.
Thank you.
I think it is a great question. I do want to point out one little thing that's just a data point on Venezuela here for the audience to remember. Going back now almost 40 years, Venezuela was the wealthiest country in South America, the wealthiest country. It is now one of the poorest countries in the world because the natural resources of the country have been pillaged by successive dictators. And when we think about the future of Venezuela, having President Guaidó here with us today, when we think about the future that could be for Venezuela, it's as an important trading partner and an important peace partner for the United States, and a tremendously, potentially powerful influence in our hemisphere. Extremely important. Now to the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords were the most extraordinary foreign policy achievement of the Trump administration in its first term. This was, you will recall, around August 2020, when it was announced that Israel would normalize peaceful relations with the United Arab Emirates and with Bahrain, and then followed with a signing ceremony on the White House lawn, and then in quick succession, 2 additional peace treaties were signed. A funky microphone moment here.
Nicaragua cutting the mic already. Wow.
It's either them
We're
or the
onto something.
Chinese.
Yeah.
It could be the Iranians.
We got a lot of countries that will not like this panel.
Followed in quick succession by peace agreements signed with Morocco and with Sudan. The tremendous success of the Abraham Accords, 4 peace agreements signed in the period of about 3 months, was more than had been accomplished in 40 years of diplomacy, Middle East diplomacy in the United States. We had the Camp David Accords signed between Israel and Egypt in 1979, and we had a peace agreement signed between Israel and Jordan in 1993. 2 agreements were deemed amazing accomplishments for Middle East peace, yet President Trump got 4 peace treaties signed, and all of this Wayback Machine to 2020, all of this, you'll remember, was during COVID. So some of the most extraordinary diplomatic efforts were undertaken, but it wouldn't have happened if the groundwork hadn't been laid a la President Trump. And the way President Trump presents possibilities to international partners is, this is why it's good for you, not why this would be bad for you. It's a very different orientation when you think about it. And when you think about, this is just a funky one. Let's try it. When you think about,
Okay, you're the problem.
I think I am the problem. When you think about what President Trump has done for, okay, we'll try this one. Thank you. When you think about what the president has done for peace in the Middle East and what the potential options are moving forward, it is really incredible, and the possibilities seem almost endless. Now, no one anticipated that on October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists would invade Israel and engage in the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And over 1,200 people were murdered and 251 hostages were taken into Gaza. We saw last week that we are on the road to having an implemented ceasefire. The remaining living hostages, 20 people, have been repatriated to their country, and 28 bodies were left behind. The Palestinian terrorists in Gaza have been slowly foot-dragging to return the remains of hostages who have been held for over 2 years in tunnels in Gaza. We'll see if they're able to carry out their end of this stage of the peace agreement to end with a ceasefire.
It is worth noting, I mean, they violated it every single day, but Hamas had to, they knew they would have to return the dead bodies, and then now they're like,
Oh, no, we
Oh,
can't.
sorry. Those dead bodies. We're going to give you random
Yeah.
dead bodies. But I want to come back to October 7th later. But can you talk about the
So-
creation of this alliance? I'd love if you can dive into Morocco specifically and
Okay.
why that specific country
Is important.
not only was important, but the way in which Morocco was chosen almost at the expense of, I hope there are no Algerians here, Algeria.
So I'm going to go first. We're going to go through a quick timeline of where we are today, just to bring everyone up to date. Where we are today is President Trump went to Israel to address the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and from there he traveled where he was just received by the Israelis as the most heroic foreign figure in history. Because he returned hostages to their families. He then went to Egypt, where he convened a Middle East peace summit with 20 leaders who weren't all from the Middle East, some from Europe. The president of Paraguay came. Interesting, he traveled amongst the farthest. Another traveler who came from very far was President Subianto of Indonesia. When we think about the Abraham Accords and where they're going, and we can talk about this a little bit later, everyone always says the magic bullet is going to be Saudi Arabia. I actually think the magic country to enter into normalization and peace agreements with Israel is going to be Indonesia, the largest, most populous Muslim majority country in the world. Now, to your question about Morocco, Morocco was the third country of the Abraham Accords to sign a normalization agreement with Israel. I say normalization because Morocco was never officially in a state of war with Israel. They just didn't have normal diplomatic relations. So in that vein, we figured that Morocco might be a little bit of an easier nut to crack than other countries that are technically, officially still at war with the state of Israel. And what happened, and history will retell this, I'm sure, but there were certain things that the Moroccans were interested in receiving as benefits for normalizing relations with Israel. And among those things was an American determination that control of Western Sahara would be something that would be determined not at the United Nations, but that we recognized Moroccan control over sovereignty of Western Sahara. This is something, Matthew, as you pointed out, Algerians were ticked off over because Algeria has been supporting the rebel Polisario. Some might call it a terrorist organization. They've been launching terror attacks on Moroccans in Morocco for a long time. And America just determined this should not be a stumbling block for the Moroccans getting to peace with Israel, to normalized relations. So we recognized Moroccan control over sovereignty of Western Sahara, and now that area is commercializing, and there are tremendous natural resources and phosphorus, which is Morocco's chief export, as well as tourism going into the region of Western Sahara. The other reason why Morocco is most interesting of all of the Arab countries and North African countries for making peace with Israel is that 1 in every 7 Israelis traces their lineage to Moroccan. So they are Moroccan Israelis. And it's a very powerful voting bloc in the Israeli Knesset. It's a very powerful cultural bloc in Israel. So having normalized relations with this North African kingdom was something extremely important and significant to Israel and to Morocco, and America was able to make that happen under President Trump.
She's being modest. It took about 2 phone calls from her and then to some 3-letter agencies, and then Morocco was admitted to the Abraham Accords. Now, President Guaidó, we've seen at this point, and this was obviously a big issue in our elections, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans fleeing due to the chaos that you've described as a tool of the Maduro regime. Many of them have ended up in America, such as yourself. And you've talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious if you can address Americans who would say, whatever happens in Venezuela is not our problem. I take it you probably don't agree with that.
Yeah, it's a good question because the Venezuela struggle is not a distant tragedy. I never thought, imagine that Venezuelans can walk from Caracas to the southern border, and that's necessity. You don't leave your house, your family, your home, your people for lack. You do that for necessity. So Venezuelan struggle is not a distant tragedy. It's a test of whether freedom can still prevail when tyranny disguises itself as democracy. Our fight is not only for a nation sovereignty, but also for the security and stability of the entire hemisphere. Because Venezuela is not just another country in crisis. It's a nation that holds us. We heard before the largest proven oil reserve on Earth. Again, the largest ones on all Earth. Vast gas and mineral resources in the middle of the continent, an immense freshwater, biodiversity, well, those resources in this moment, the very ones that fuel prosperity, clean energy, all over the region and the world are today being used by a criminal regime for finance, repression, terrorism, chaos, tren de agua, drug dealers, not only in the Caribbean, also in the US because Maduro stole an election, he commit fraud. So the restoring democracy back in Venezuela is not only a moral duty, it's a strategic imperative for the Americans. Not only United States, also Latin America. We are already seeing what happened in Colombia with Petro. It's part of the problem for sure, but it's an imperative and a strategic for all the region. And I have to say again, I heard in that moment Senator Marco Rubio hearing in the Senate. America must remain prosperous, stronger, and safer. And I am agree. But my belief is the Americas must be for that goal, for that. And we already seen, the immigration problem. And the problem is not the immigration, it's the safer of the border. The migrants are part of the building of this, not only this country, also Venezuela, by the way. In this moment, when Venezuela stands free, the hemisphere stands taller, for sure. When we protect our people, their resources under the rule of law, we protect the world's security and the future of freedom itself. So it's a strategic action to achieve that we hold, and not only free Venezuela, also a free continent, talking about Cuba and Nicaragua, that is part of the problem for sure.
And one of the most undeniable successes of the Trump second term has been the near total cessation of illegal immigration. And President Trump talked about how under Biden, Venezuela was actually safer because they were just emptying their prisons and sending these people to the United States of America, tren de agua gangs, things like that. What does Venezuela look like right now? How has the crackdown on illegal immigration impacted Venezuela? Is that a thing that's being felt with, as you were just describing, people are not packing up their bags and walking, across dangerous terrain in Central America and South America to get to the United States? How has our no longer having an open border policy in America affecting your home country?
Well, the people is still fleeing from Latin America, South America, but the problem is still the same, Maduro. I want to get back to my country in a safer way. If I've been there, I've been killed or in a jail, like many of my people back in Venezuela. My team is still in jail back in Venezuela. My uncle was detained and tortured in a military jail back in Venezuela. That happened when you only raise your voice, when you speak with truth back in Venezuela. If we resolve the problem that Maduro have become for all the continent, we also will be solving the migration situation. And I have to insist, it's Maduro the consequence or the cause, per se, of this, and they saw that they can use that as leverage in all the continent to promote his terrific regime all over the world. But I have to insist, if we resolve the problem, we're going to see a stronger Venezuela also, a prosperous one, and a country that people want to live, to get back, to stay, to achieve, to dream again back in our country. With the largest oil reserve in the world, we can grow fastly in the continent and stabilize all the region and to promote healthy relations, economic relations, but also diplomatic ones to secure and promote leverage all over the continent and the world.
Bonnie, you were the #2 Senate-confirmed leader of USAID, confirmed unanimously back when the Senate did such things. Now, this, of course, happened before the Biden administration used USAID as a piggy bank to fund insane, comedically insane, and at times illegal grants to far-left NGOs all over the world. It's somewhat an honor that I'm the only journalist who never received a paycheck from USAID. What should the State Department's new international assistance program look like globally, and then also specifically when it comes to countering China's Belt and Road Initiative?
That is a fantastic question, and I'm my good friend
Don't forget, it's 2 questions, so I want you on both.
My good friend Ambassador Waltz took my line. I always start off conversations sort of on the wither USAID level of America is the most generous country in the history of the world. And it's something that we as Americans almost just take for granted, that it's in our DNA, it's built into who we are as Americans, that we offer a hand up to people who are in need, wherever that might be. And for almost 60 years, the United States did that through USAID. We helped countries both on their paths toward economic development and paths toward stabilization, as well as we stepped in when there were humanitarian crises. And you heard Ambassador Waltz talking about this distinction between development and humanitarian crises. I think where things went wrong in the Biden administration, and Matthew, you pointed out these comedically insane distributions of American taxpayer dollars, but there were also illegal distributions of American taxpayer dollars. Our tax money went to fund organizations that were in violation of US law. One concrete example of that would be organizations that operated in violation of the Taylor Force Act. The Taylor Force Act was actually championed by Ambassador Waltz when he was in Congress, and it was designed to keep American tax dollars from flowing to Palestinian organizations, NGOs, and the Palestinian Authority for paying terrorists lifetime annuities, or if they were killed in their suicide attacks, annuities to their families in perpetuity for killing Americans in Israel.
And Taylor Force himself was an American military veteran who was stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist in
Tel
Israel
Aviv,
on an organized trip,
Yeah.
stabbed to death.
Yeah, exactly. He was on a trip to visit the Startup Nation as part of a business school trip to see how innovation thrives in Israel. And a Palestinian terrorist came up to him in the street in Tel Aviv and stabbed him to death. So Ambassador Waltz, Congressman Waltz, helped push forward the Taylor Force Act in recognition that we cannot support entities that pay others to kill us. Well, under President Biden, that's exactly what USAID did with NGO and what are called international NGO funding of organizations that contributed to the coffers of terrorist organizations. This would include, and Ambassador Waltz mentioned this, UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, which has been proven to be complicit in the October 7th terrorist attacks in Israel. The Biden administration funded UNRWA to the tune of $3 billion after we in the first Trump administration cut all assistance to UNRWA. This is just an example of how American trust in USAID was eroded. And yet, American heartstrings are pulled when there are tornadoes or there are hurricanes in the Caribbean and islands are wiped out because of a storm. We want to help. And so USAID was shut down and is being restructured under the Department of State. And my sense is that the humanitarian component, that part that pulls on American heartstrings when people are displaced from their homes because of war, or when people are suffering from real famine in countries like Sudan and Nigeria, when people are suffering humanitarian crises, America will be there. The efforts that the Biden administration undertook in what is called development assistance were the areas that Congress really took a red pen to and struck out of the budget. And for American NGOs that want to support all of the insane, I'll use your word, Matthew, the programming that was developed by the Biden administration, they're perfectly able to do that from their own personal checkbooks. But the American taxpayer writ large won't be doing much of that moving forward. I think, too, when you think about your next question about how USAID now under the Department of State can be used to counter China and China's Belt and Road Initiative, which was their start of development assistance around the world, usually in the form of large-scale infrastructure projects. It's hard to compete with the Chinese Communist Party and their seemingly endless capacity to fund infrastructure projects, bridges that may or may not be helpful to a particular community, soccer stadiums in subnational capitals in developing countries, significantly ports in strategically located parts of the world from which the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, can operate. These are the kinds of projects that China has funded through its Belt and Road Initiative. With $6 trillion at their disposal. Well, American taxpayers aren't going to pay $6 trillion in development assistance to anyone, not even here at home. However, where America comes in and is massively competitive with China was also alluded to by Ambassador Waltz. This is where our private sector comes in. When there are actual incentives to build. There are actual incentives to invest in communities, to build workforces locally that are capable of building trade relations with the United States in the short, medium, and long terms. These are areas where our government can harness the best and brightest of American innovation and deploy that with a business sense, where there are profit margins, where there are incentives for growth. That's an area where I suspect our ability, with not $6 trillion of investable capital, but $60 trillion of investable capital for deployment around the world in infrastructure, in development, will make a sizable difference. And certainly that's something being pushed by the Trump administration.
And this is a little peek behind the journalism hood, but Bonnie, to go on, this is basically me commissioning an op-ed from you about this. But can you talk about also where assistance should not go? And I mean this in the sense, I feel like I say this on TV once a week, that the only famine that existed in Gaza was the starving Jews in tunnels who were being fed by who were being starved by fat Palestinian animals, filming them as they dug their own graves. You know, as you were saying, American heartstrings are tugged when we see starving children. Of course, there was no famine in Gaza. Hamas's own fake numbers show that there's no famine in Gaza. When should America look at a purported problem and say, that's not our problem?
Look, our media has been hijacked by the far left. I think everybody here, with the exception
I think
Matthew,
Richard Nixon would
you,
agree with that.
I certainly think Richard Nixon would agree with that. You are a rare exception when it comes to actually...
That's why I didn't get USAID funding, by the way.
Could be. But it's rare for the media to do the hard look, to actually question data, to actually question statistics. Why is it hard? I don't know. It shouldn't be. That's their job. But when the Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza throws out fake numbers of children being killed in a war zone, the US and the international media just accepted that as fact. Fact, being given and spoon-fed to them by a terrorist regime that has total control over the local government in Gaza. It's criminal the way the media just absorbed that and reported it as fact and continued to report it and cited itself as the sources of the information. So there are real problems with that kind of assistance and making the determination of what is true, what is not true, but it is incumbent on the United States to be the government, to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And Ambassador Waltz said this as well. His job is to ensure at the UN that we're not throwing good American money after bad when it comes to funding some of these UN bodies, entities like UNRWA, entities like the UN so-called Human Rights Council, and instead to look for ways to curtail that US funding, our investment, into things that actually make sense and are beneficial to the American taxpayer.
President Guaidó, this is where I have you start talking even more about just Venezuela and more about the Western Hemisphere more broadly. You were talking about the chaos, again, as a tool, as you said. The current regime in Venezuela is laying claim to oil and gas discoveries off of Guyana's international shores. What do you make of the legitimacy of those claims, and is that something that you want the United States of America to weigh in on?
Well, that's a polemic equation because for us Venezuelan, that's a historic reclaim. In this moment, of course, Maduro deteriorate all that kind of claims that we have historical. But if you think, if Venezuela could produce not only 3 million, 4 million barrels a day, like we used to produce maybe 10 or 12 years ago. We invest in the oil sector almost 300 billions dollar, but we decrease the oil production back in our country because the corruption, all the parastate that Maduro promote. If we are produce 5 million barrels a day, 7 million, maybe 10, we should be produced in this moment, the discussion could be different because we are talking about new discoveries, new possible sectors that we have to produce back in Venezuela. We can recover the production back in Venezuela in a free Venezuela with rule of law, with security, very fast, maybe 3, 5 million barrels a day. Talking about the claim, about the threat that Maduro made to Guyana, that's a different question. Maduro doesn't have the abilities to promote any war, any invasion, but they can promote chaos, as we've been talking minutes ago. So if Maduro remains in power, the cost will not be only for Venezuelan people. The cost is greater. It's instability across our hemisphere. It's the opportunity cost by produce not only oil, also gas, minerals that we can be commercialized all over the region and in the main initiative with the U.S. So, the largest oil reserve, immense gas, the threatened against Guyana, the minerals, the fresh water, the resources. If they remain in the hands of a criminal enterprise, you know what is happening in this moment and the links with the bad guys all over the world. It's a strategic necessity to the rule of law overcome in the output that what happened in Venezuela. We already won an election the last year. We have a president-elect that is Edmundo González Urrutia against a tyrannic regime that come with cost. Thousands of political prisoners, thousands of refugees, millions of migrants across the continent, and only one responsible, Nicolas Maduro, the maximum diplomatic pressure that inaugure, that promote President Trump 45, and in this moment 47, targeted sanctions against criminals, support the democratic movement and social sobriety. It's key in this moment to prevent not only a crisis in the region, a new one with Guyana, but also to secure all the asset and commodity to a healthy region in the Western Hemisphere.
And sticking with your region, it seems to me that there are two trends that are happening. There are many trends, but two of them in South America are we have formerly democratically aligned and minded countries that are now turning socialist or communist, Brazil and Colombia. And you have countries that were once socialist are now focused on strengthening ties with the United States. We have Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia. What do you think is behind those trends? And then, of course, there's Venezuela that is trying to have democratic elections that you win, and yet you're in Miami right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the lack of delivery. I mean, if you only promote and make promises and don't make the delivery for the people turn around. I mean, that happened in this moment with Petro in Colombia, who is, I mean, a bad person for saying the less back in Colombia. And the ties with Maduro is evident, also with Lula. Lula was in jail, I mean, 3 years ago for corruption. He defended Maduro in the international stage, but they have the opportunity to promote change with their people, with Colombians, Brazilians, getting promoted or elect a new candidate. We have to evade or to promote the rule of law because the instability, the impunity that Maduro can act must reflect expected actions next year. I mean, again, the leadership of President Trump planned phase against the Maduro regime. It's a key for the evolve for the future of all the Americas in this moment. It's a tragedy for Venezuelans. What happened? It's painful. It's difficult being exiled. It's not only my situation. I mean, 8 million Venezuelans. We want to get back to our country. I want to my girls rise and grow up in Venezuela. The older one has 8 years old. Miranda has 8 years old, and many are only 4 years old. I mean, they have to cross a river to escape from persecution that the regime promote against his dad. They doesn't have to be running for persecution when they are only babies. So that's the communisms, that's socialisms back in Latin America, and the people are rejected that situation. Thanks God. Also in Colombia, aunque Colombians can talk about what happened in Colombia, but I am sure that Petro is going to be out the next year. Thanks God.
And you mentioned at the beginning, obviously, I think most people here know, but the ties that Venezuela's regime has to countries, specifically Russia and Iran. And I think it's undeniable that Russia and Iran specifically are far weaker now than they were during your time as president. Obviously, Russia, due to its war with Ukraine, and Iran, due to the actions of both Israel and America. Do you think that these countries being, I think, objectively less powerful, is that sapping strength from Maduro? How are the conflicts that America had with Iran and that the West is having with Russia impacting the Maduro regime's strength?
For sure, you hit in the target. Back in 2019 and 2020, Maduro used Russia to bypass US sanctions and also European sanctions, by the way. They used Russia, they laundry money back in Russia, they make commercial flights Tehran, Caracas, to make money, get back to our country in cash. It was a crazy situation back in 2018 and 2020. But in this moment, that you have a weaker Russia, a weaker Iran, you have a weaker also regime back in Venezuela. And again, we have to plan to face of impunity. If you make accountable regimes like Putin's regime or the Iran's regime, you also make accountable Maduro's regime. And you get weaker dictators around the world. And we can promote better ways to recover democracy in the case of Venezuelans. I mean, in the case of the Americas, we have to stabilize the region and to promote democracy, liberty, because if tyranny stands unchallenged in Venezuela, it will spread. But if freedom prevails, it will echo in Russia, Iran, and you send a strong and clear message. That's what happened in this moment when you saw an afraid Maduro, because they already saw what happened back in Iran. It's a good moment to democracy and to liberty. We have to push to recovery, and that is why this fight matters, not just for us, but for the future of the hemisphere that must remain prosperous, stronger, and safer.
Honestly, that's such a good point, and one we could end on, but we still have more time. But I think noting the way in which these perhaps seemingly unrelated conflicts really always will impact us in America is an important reminder that we can aspire to retreat to Fortress America, but it never works. It's never worked in our entire history. I'm trying to get to every continent. I don't think we're going to get to Antarctica, unfortunately. But Bonnie, let's go to China and then back to the Middle East. So one of the things that we're seeing, and this will also incorporate Africa here, is that China, you were already talking about the Belt and Road a little bit, but it's pillaging Africa at the expense of both the African countries with debt trap diplomacy, with these deals that are hardly worth the paper that they're written on. How can America, we're behind there, how can America enter that continent and that market at the direct expense of China?
Well, it's so interesting to be at the Nixon Foundation talking about China, because of course it was President Nixon who opened America to China. I think I might need another mic replacement.
It's funny, I was going to talk to you about technology, but I don't know if that's going to work.
We'll try that. Hello? Yeah. I'm just cursed today. To have a conversation about President Nixon and not include a really meaningful conversation about where his opening to China leaves us today would be an oversight. So we won't do that. I think what President Nixon and Henry Kissinger thought when they opened to China was, if we open to China, which at the time was about 20% of the world's population, they'll want to be more like us. And we'll open this massive new market to American products. And on some level, that was a little bit true, and every successive president has thought the same thing, that if only we give more to the China relationship, they will want to be more like the free world. And at the end of the day, I think we can all say that that didn't really happen. It was still extremely important to do, and because you can't box out 20% of the world's population, but you can call out bad behavior. And that is what we see from China day in and day out. We see it in unfair trade. We see it in human rights abuses of their own population, where they have put Muslim minority Uyghurs into concentration and labor camps, where they surveil their own population and build out something that they call social credit scores to determine what types of benefits Chinese citizens should or should not be eligible for. They steal our intellectual property because we have an open patent system, and they deploy industrial and governmental espionage against the United States government and against our companies. And then, of course, they experiment with bioweapons, as we all saw with COVID-19. And, President Trump in the first Trump administration, Trump 45, learned some very, very important lessons about how to deal with China. We saw how they hoarded PPE, remember that term? Personally protective equipment, masks and gowns that made our hospitals in the United States less safe and left us struggling with the COVID disease in our own borders. In the race for technological dominance, which is China's end goal, we are really in a race for our lives and for our livelihoods. So whether it's in the development of bioweapons, where we're in a race for our lives, or it's in the development of 5G or 6G technology for communications, we're in a race for our livelihoods. People in think tank world, which I now inhabit, talk about the great power competition that we're in with China, and I dispute this term. A competition implies that we're playing the same game and we're playing by the same rules, and we're not playing the same game. And China rewrites its own rules every single day, but among those rules are certain standards: lie, cheat, and steal. And that's not a game that American government or American industry is particularly adept at playing, especially when you have transparent government and you have quarterly reporting that corporations are bound to. So here we are in the US, a very open environment in which for decades China has sent their best and their brightest students to study in our universities, and they have in more recent years, under General Secretary Xi Jinping, you'll notice I didn't call him president because he wasn't elected by the people. The General Secretary has pulled these Chinese scientists back to China, often with financial incentives, but also often under threat that their families remaining in China will fall victim to disappearances. And they are building China's new economy to be in opposition to the economy of the free world, particularly the United States. What I used to speak about at USAID during COVID holds true today, which is that America is at a crossroads where we have to look at ways that we can onshore, nearshore, and allied shore manufacturing. We need to gain control of our supply chains so that we are not made vulnerable by incidents that could very well happen again, like a COVID pandemic. Some people will say that by onshoring and nearshoring and allied shoring, we are cutting China out of the supply chain, and that will just lead to Chinese development in this direction and free world development of technology in the other direction. Ambassador Waltz talked about this, about how at the UN there are standards setting bodies, and maybe, although I doubt it, maybe those bodies can have some impact on the development of technology moving forward. I doubt it because those UN bodies move so slowly and technology races forward every single day. It's possible that we're looking at two different evolutions of technology, one that's led by China, one that's led by the United States. Some people will be concerned that aren't we concerned that there will be two standards? Well, aren't two standards, one of which is led by the United States and the free world, better than a single standard that's led only by China? And I think the answer to that, and I think everyone in this room would agree, yes, it's better to have that. It is a bifurcation of our economies, and that is troubling. But I do think that the best technologies will win out in the end, which brings us to Africa, Matthew. The technologies depend on natural resources that are sometimes referred to as rare earth elements. They're actually not rare elements. They're found throughout the world, but they're found in small concentrations, which means that mining these rare earth elements and minerals is extremely costly if it's done properly. We have rare earth elements here in the United States in small pockets and small concentrations all over the country, but we are such a regulatory environment when it comes to mining and exploration that the incentives are not there for mining countries to do our very own clean mining of these natural resources. A lot of the resources are in remote African countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And the resources are mined in probably the dirtiest ways imaginable, without safety gear, without protections, and with a lot of child labor. I think that most humanitarians would think that there have to be better ways to extract natural resources, and that maybe we can do some of that here at home with an improved and less regulatory environment. But what happens in Africa is these natural resources are extracted and then they are shipped directly to China for processing, where, oh, by the way, they also are not processed in a clean way. So all those greenhouse gases that the left is so concerned about, they are being emitted in order to make solar panels for the green economy, which also, by the way, are mostly made in China in a non-clean way. And those are for electric vehicles that run on batteries that are manufactured in countries that don't operate a clean environment. All of this, I'm saying, can be done here at home. It can be done closer to home, and it can be done with our allies so that we are able to secure our supply chains moving forward, which is vital for our national economy to survive and thrive.
And to date myself, I remember when I was in China, a couple had lots of observations, but two relevant ones were so many people asked me if I was friends with Nicki Minaj. And eventually I said, you know what? Yes, I am. I am friends with Nicki Minaj. And a lot of other people would just come up and touch my hair. And I've since realized they were probably like scouting me out to like send me to Xinjiang and then shave it off and make a wig. And President Guaidó, now that you're going to take us home, ironically and perhaps fittingly, we talked last night about how President Trump, President Nixon, Congressman Issa spent time in the wilderness, the proverbial wilderness. You're almost in the literal Everglades in your own wilderness right now. I'm curious from a personal and political journey standpoint, what lessons have you taken? I mean, we've all spent our own time in various wildernesses. What have you learned about yourself and your country and your people during your time in exile?
Being exiled is an everyday contradiction, because I'm free and alive. It's a privilege when you face a dictatorial regime. I have friends that can count on that. I mean, they're in jail, they're killed by the regime. The last week, the regime tried to kill two of our team members back in exile in Colombia. So it's a everyday contradiction because I'm free and alive. I'm with my family, thanks God. But I'm not in the place where I want to be. I want to be in my home. I want to be struggling, fight, but with conditions. I mean, we won an election several times, not only a decade ago when I was re-elected congressman back in Venezuela, then interim president in 2019. But in this moment, trying to expand our not only network, our possibilities of future recovery democracy, to learn about not only in a university, we founded a democracy innovation laboratory back at FIU nearby. Also, raising my two girls, explain them about democracy, about liberty. Every day I saw people taking liberty by granted, the freedom. And it's not. I mean, this could sound crazy, but when I go to the supermarket and I can decide what I want, not what the regime put over there, or I mean, when I open the water and actually came water, back in Venezuela doesn't happen, because corruption, because so the liberty also is about decisions, everyday decisions, and we have to fight for them. And when you experience that, it's an everyday contradiction, and it touched me every day. And I don't take anything for granted. The love for your family, your closest one, the liberty, the freedom, the democracy. So we have to take action, and I want to take action every day to recover democracy and this place. And I have to thanks again the Nixon Foundation for this meeting.
I have one other quick question for you. Unfortunately, in America, if you want to know what Venezuela looks like, go to New York after they elect Zoran Mamdani. But President Guaidó, you're a politician to the core. I'd love a yes or no answer. I know I'm not going to get it. Are you going to run for president of Venezuela again?
Look, I'm
See,
42
I already
years
said
old.
no, no. Go on.
I already been interim president at 35. I mean, the youngest one in the history of Venezuela, the youngest one, National Assembly president. I want to serve my country. But I also want to be free. And the ultimate goal is to be happy, the happiness, experience peace. But and this is a quote from Simon Bolivar, who say, "I can give you any title, president, professor, whatever, but only be a citizen. But I have to make this. I want to be a citizen in Venezuela, with my duties, with my rights, and also for my kids, and also for Latin America, for the Americas. So if I have to serve my country in any way, we're gonna do it.
For those counting, that's a yes. Thank you so much to the once and future president of Venezuela, Juan Guaidó, and the once and future deputy administrator of USAID, Bonnie Glick. You guys have been terrific.
Please enjoy a brief break. We'll return shortly.